Okay, let's just dive right into this. Picture this. It's April 2026. A luxury cruise ship pushes off from Ushuaia, Argentina. You've got about 150 passengers and crew from 23 different countries, all gearing up for this absolute dream voyage to Antarctica. For the first few days, total perfection. People are mingling, enjoying the parties, completely oblivious to the fact that this highly anticipated trip is about to become a literal floating nightmare. So today, in this explainer, we're unpacking a chilling, real-life medical mystery that turned a luxury vessel into a ghost ship. And we're going to explore the science behind the silent killer that caused the whole shebang.
Let's map out exactly how this nightmare unfolded because the timeline is just harrowing. Just 5 days into the trip, April 11th, a 70-year-old Dutch passenger suddenly comes down with a fever, a headache, and some mild diarrhea. He sees the ship's doctor, but within a day or two, he can barely breathe. His condition tanks so fast that he actually dies right there on the ship. Nobody knows why. The cruise just keeps going. Fast forward to April 24th. The ship docks at St. Helena, and the man's grieving wife disembarks with his body. She travels to South Africa to catch a flight home to Amsterdam, but right before boarding on the 25th, she collapses. By April 26th, she's dead. Meanwhile, back on the ship, absolute panic sets in. A German woman gets sick on the 28th, dies 4 days later. One by one, passengers are dying, and nobody has a clue what's going on. Finally, on May 2nd, the World Health Organization is called in.
And here's what the WHO testing actually found. The culprit? Hantavirus. Now, the terrifying reality is that hantavirus isn't just one single bug. It's a whole family of deadly viruses carried by rodents. But here is the part that literally keeps medical professionals up at night. Despite decades of research, there is zero FDA or WHO-approved vaccine. No proven antiviral treatment either. If you get infected, doctors can really only give you supportive care. Ultimately, your survival comes down to your own immune system just battling it out.
To really wrap our heads around what these passengers were facing, let's look at the mortality rate. It can hit a staggering 50%, basically a coin flip. It has the potential to kill half the people it infects. It's an incredibly lethal pathogen, which completely explains the sheer terror of having this thing loose on an isolated ship, stranded in the middle of the ocean.
Now, what's wild is that the way this virus attacks your body actually depends on where you are in the world, because different rodents carry different strains. Over in Asia and Europe, the virus usually hits as HFRS. That's hemorrhagic fever with renal syndrome. This brutally attacks the kidneys, causing them to shut down and triggers severe internal bleeding. But if you're in the Americas, it manifests as HPS, hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. This version goes right for the lungs, filling them with fluid and ultimately causing the person to suffocate.
Section 1. A Silent History. 70 Years of Mystery.
To really understand this pathogen, we gotta look back. This isn't some brand new threat that just thawed out of the ice. Scientists have actually been desperately trying to decode this mystery for over 70 years. The first major recorded outbreak takes us back to the 1950s during the Korean War. Over 3,000 American soldiers in South Korea suddenly got hit with this agonizing mix of high fevers, vomiting, and kidney failure. About 15% of them died. Military doctors were completely baffled. A lot of them actually thought they were dealing with a new chemical weapon. It wasn't until almost 30 years later, around 1980, that a South Korean virologist finally cracked it. He traced the illness to a virus carried by mice, naming it after the nearby Hampton River.
But honestly, the most dramatic chapter in this virus's history happened in May 1993 in the southwestern U.S. In just a matter of weeks, 10 perfectly healthy young Navajo tribe members got sick and died with terrifying speed. They'd get this flu-like fever, and then, boom, their lungs would fill with fluid. The initial mortality rate for this outbreak was an unbelievable 75%. 3 out of every 4 infected people didn't make it. Medical investigators were totally stumped by a bug that strikes so suddenly and kills in mere days.
So how did they eventually figure out the 1993 outbreak? Well, they listened to the oral history of the tribal elders. The elders laid out this fascinating ecological chain reaction. Basically, in 91 and 92, a massive El Niño weather pattern dumped an unusual amount of heavy rain on the region. All that rain led to a huge, bumper crop of pinyon pine nuts. Since those nuts are a main food source for local mice, all this extra food caused the mouse population to just explode. And more mice, that means exponentially more chances for the virus to spread and eventually jump to humans.
Now you might be thinking, okay, so this is just an American or Korean issue, right? Nope. Actually, scratch that. It's a global silent threat. For the longest time, scientists were convinced it didn't even exist in India. But a study from 2005 to 2008 in the Vellore district totally flipped that script. Researchers found 28 confirmed cases among kidney disease patients, warehouse workers, and the Irula tribe, who are traditional rat catchers. Even wilder, they found that about 4% of the general population they tested had hantavirus antibodies, meaning they had been exposed at some point without even knowing it.
Okay, so let's bring this all back to our core mystery. Up to this point in medical history, the absolute golden rule was that hantavirus only spreads from rodents to humans. It wasn't supposed to be able to spread from person to person. So we've got to ask the obvious question. If it strictly comes from mice, how on earth did it tear through a luxury cruise ship in the middle of the ocean, jumping from passenger to passenger?
Well, the answer is a massive biological plot twist that showed up in southern Argentina in 1996. It's called the Andes strain. This specific strain completely shattered that rodent-only rule. To this day, the Andes strain is the only known variant in the entire hantavirus family capable of confirmed human-to-human transmission. What's worse, scientists found out that certain people infected with this strain can become super spreaders, passing the virus to an unusually high number of people.
And boom, that completely solves our ghost ship mystery. When investigators dug into it, they found out that in March 2026, right before boarding the ship, that first Dutch couple had gone on a bird-watching tour in Ushuaia, a tour that led them right into a rat-infested landfill. They picked up the Andes strain right there and, tragically, boarded the ship during their active infection window. That was the spark. By the time the ship was finally allowed to dock in Tenerife on May 10th, after being turned away everywhere else, they had 10 confirmed cases, 3 deaths, and a whole bunch of passengers being medically evacuated to hospitals across South Africa and Europe.
Section 2. Is this the next pandemic?
Look, with headlines blowing up and cruise ships being denied port entry, it's totally natural to panic a bit. You're probably wondering, are we watching the start of the next global pandemic? Let's just take a breath and look at the facts. The WHO actually considers the global risk to be very low. Unlike COVID-19 or the flu, hantavirus, even this scary Andes strain, is not airborne. It's not just floating around in the air waiting for you to breathe it in. For human-to-human transmission, it requires extremely close, prolonged physical contact or direct exposure to bodily fluids. In the real world, this means it pretty much only spreads between family members sharing a bed or healthcare workers taking care of a very sick patient. Plus, human-to-human spread has literally never been recorded in Asia or Europe. It is strictly localized to the Andes strain in South America.
But honestly, the biggest reassuring factor here is the timeline. One day. The window where a human can pass the Andes strain to another human is incredibly, almost mercifully short. An infected person is really only contagious for a single day, right around when their symptoms first start showing up. So those massive 14-day quarantines we all got used to, simply not necessary here. Think about it. If that Dutch couple had boarded the cruise ship just 2 or 3 days later, the virus probably wouldn't have spread to a single other soul.
Section 3. Prevention is the best weapon.
So while the actual mechanics of the virus make a global pandemic highly unlikely, we definitely can't ignore that 50% mortality rate. When you're dealing with a disease this lethal with zero cure and zero vaccine, we have to take proactive steps. The power is completely in our hands. Let's walk through some really simple everyday defense strategies. First, physically seal up your home. Look for any structural gaps or little holes where mice or rats could squeeze in. Second, if you're cleaning out a dusty, closed-off space like a basement or an old storage unit, throw on an N95 mask and some gloves, especially if you spot any mouse droppings. And finally, just keep up with strict basic hygiene. Don't leave food sitting out, and make sure your garbage is secured so you aren't literally rolling out the red carpet for the main carriers of this virus.
You know, this virus has been a silent threat for decades, usually only popping into the news when a deadly cluster strikes. But knowledge really is our absolute best defense. And when we look back at how that 1993 outbreak was directly triggered by the El Niño weather pattern, it leaves us with a pretty heavy thought. As our global climate keeps shifting and phenomena like El Niño get more intense, what other silent, perfectly adapted biological threats are just lying dormant out there, waiting for the exact right ecological chain reaction to wake them up? Something to think about. Thanks for exploring this explainer with me today, and keep asking the big questions.